The global energy market is going through its biggest shakeup in, maybe 50 years. And at the center of it all is nuclear energy. Yeah, an industry that a lot of people thought was basically fading away is roaring back to life. But here's the crazy part. It's not governments leading the charge this time. Nope. It's Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. So let's get into it and figure out how artificial intelligence is basically forcing the revival of the atom. Picture this. It's January 2026, and something is happening that just a few years ago would have sounded completely insane. 3 Mile Island is being restarted. And yeah, that 3 Mile Island. The name itself is basically shorthand for nuclear disaster in America. But instead of being torn down, it's being reborn as a brand new clean energy center. So you have to be asking, who on earth is paying for this? Well, the answer is Microsoft. They've signed a 20-year deal to buy up all the power from this revived site. Now, this isn't just some weird, quirky headline. This is the very beginning of a huge, fundamental shift in how we power our digital world. Okay, so to really get what's going on, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the AI energy crunch. That's the core of the problem. Then we'll see big tech's pivot to nuclear. After that, we'll explore this new kind of nuclear tech, the fuel that powers it, how people are investing, and finally, we'll talk about the real risks and what the road ahead looks like. It really all starts with this hidden problem, right? The absolutely staggering amount of energy that AI uses. If you want to understand why nuclear is coming back, you've got to look past the politics and just focus on the raw physics of computation. Just think about this for a second. A simple Google search, something we do all the time, uses about zero point 0.3 watt-hours of energy. But a single query on ChatGPT, that's almost 3.0 watt-hours. That is a 10-fold increase for just one single interaction. And that doesn't even count the insane amount of energy it takes to train these models in the first place. And here's what that looks like on a global scale. The International Energy Agency is projecting that the amount of electricity data centers use is going to double by 2030. To put that in perspective, that's like adding the entire power grid of Japan just for data centers. It's just massive. But here's the real kicker. AI doesn't sleep. Those data centers need what's called firm power. That means it has to be on all the time, 24/7, 365, no interruptions. And on top of that, because of all their net zero promises, tech giants need this power to be totally carbon-free. Now look, solar and wind are amazing, but they're intermittent, right? They don't work when the sun's not out or the wind isn't blowing. So when you boil it all down, that leaves one proven technology that checks every single box: nuclear fission. So faced with this new reality, the wealthiest companies on the entire planet are making this really dramatic pivot. They're not just buying energy off the grid anymore. They're actually funding the next generation of our energy infrastructure. And the scale of these deals is just wow. We already talked about Microsoft and 3 Mile Island, but check out Amazon. They're buying almost a gigawatt of power from a nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. And get this, they are literally building their new data center campus right next to the cooling towers so they can plug in directly. Then you've got Google, who just signed the world's first ever corporate deal to buy power from a whole fleet of new advanced reactors being built by a company called Kairos Power. This is a massive, coordinated injection of cash into the nuclear sector. And this big corporate push is happening at the exact same time as a huge government initiative. The U.S. Department of Energy wants to triple the country's nuclear power output by 2050. We're talking 400 gigawatts. This isn't just some wishful thinking either. It's backed by billions in funding and has support from both sides of the aisle. The momentum here is, frankly, undeniable. So, what makes this nuclear comeback so different from the past? Well, it's a fundamental shift in the technology itself. We're moving away from the old, clunky model to something way more flexible and scalable. The key innovation here is something called the Small Modular Reactor, or SMR for short. And the whole idea is revolutionary because it's so simple. Instead of spending a decade building one gigantic, custom power plant on-site, you mass-produce smaller reactors in a factory. This completely flips the script on the economics and risk of building nuclear power. Honestly, the best way to think about it is like the move from a mainframe computer to a laptop. A traditional nuclear plant, that's your mainframe. It's a massive, custom-built project that costs billions and takes forever. An SMR, though, that's your laptop. It's standardized, it's built in a factory, and you can literally ship the parts on the back of a truck. This shift from a construction project to a manufactured product, that's the whole ballgame. And the process itself gets way, way simpler. First, you build the parts on an assembly line, kind of like you're building a car. Then you ship those finished modules to the site, And finally, you basically just plug them together. And if you need more power down the road, you don't build a whole new plant. You just add another module. And it's not just SMRs either. There's this whole new world of advanced reactor designs popping up. Kairos Power, the company working with Google, uses molten salt as a coolant instead of high-pressure water, which makes it inherently safer. And then you've got companies like Oklo, which is backed by Sam Altman from OpenAI. They're developing these things called fast reactors that have the incredible ability to run on recycled nuclear waste. Okay, but none of these incredible new reactors can run without fuel. And this brings us to what might be the single biggest challenge and maybe the biggest opportunity in this entire story, the fuel supply chain. So, these new advanced reactors, they don't use the same old fuel. They need something called HALEU, which stands for high-assay, low-enriched uranium. Just think of it as a more potent, more efficient kind of uranium that's essential for these smaller, more advanced designs. And here is where it gets really interesting, geopolitically speaking. Until just very recently, the only place in the entire world where you could commercially buy this HALEU fuel was from a subsidiary of Rosatom. That's Russia's state-owned nuclear energy company. The recent ban on Russian uranium has really exposed this huge strategic problem, and now the United States is in an absolute race against time to build its own domestic HALEU supply chain from scratch. Now, this whole industrial transformation, from mining all the way to advanced tech, has created a really complex and, frankly, fascinating financial landscape. So let's break down the different ways that investors are looking at this new atomic age. You can kind of think of the whole nuclear world in four main buckets. First, you've got the utilities, like Constellation. These are the folks who own and operate the existing plants. They are absolute cash cows right now. Then you have the miners, like Cameco, pulling the raw uranium out of the ground. After them, you have the tech developers, like NuScale, who are designing the next generation of SMRs. And finally, you've got the absolutely critical fuel cycle companies, like Centrus, which is the only company in the US right now licensed to produce the HALEU fuel that everybody needs. Okay, so let's be super clear here. This whole revival is not a done deal. There are some major headwinds that could totally derail the whole thing, and it's really important to acknowledge them. There are really three big risks. The first is execution risk. I mean, the nuclear industry is famous for projects going way over budget and way behind schedule. Just look at the recent Vogel plant in Georgia. SMRs have to break that curse. Second is regulatory risk. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is designed to be slow and cautious, for good reason. Any safety issue with a new design could freeze licensing for years. And finally, there's the long-term waste problem. The US still doesn't have a permanent place to store spent nuclear fuel. But even with all those risks, the bigger picture is what's really driving all of this. We are entering what a lot of people are calling an energy supercycle. For the first time in modern history, our demand for electricity is growing faster than the overall economy. This decoupling is being driven by two huge forces, the explosion of AI and the electrification of everything else, from our cars to our homes. The grid is fast becoming the most valuable piece of infrastructure on the planet. So we're left with this really fascinating question, aren't we? Artificial intelligence, a technology born of the mind, has created a purely physical problem, this insatiable hunger for clean, reliable energy. The question for all of us is whether splitting the atom is going to be our salvation in this new era, or if it's going to present us with our next great technological and political challenge. The race is definitely on.